Talk to me a little bit about that regional breakdown of where you see things today.
Well, your insight is smack on. So I can just say that you're right in your perceptions on where the votes are in those different parts of the country. But there are vote splits because the dynamic has changed. So Atlantic Canada, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, not likely to change, although we've seen a lot of Liberal premiers dumped down there.
Yeah.
So you're right, we may see some change, but let's take them out of the mix then. And let's suggest that British Columbia is competitive in different parts of the province,
Right.
and they yield some. Let's take them out of the mix for a moment. Well, that does leave us just with Ontario and Quebec. And for the last 20 years, what we've seen in Ontario is one change, and that is that there used to be a band on the Macdonald-Cartier Freeway that would go from basically Toronto to the Ottawa corridor, almost to Quebec, that if you were on either side of that band, that was what got you either the minority or the majority government. You had to pick up those seats. And that has changed in the last decade to the area code that surrounds Ontario, around Toronto, that's like a big donut called the 905 area code. And that's flipped provincially and federally, conservative and liberal. And what we now see is that it's hovering and flipping back and forth a little bit more because it's got an impact of Doug Ford in the province of Ontario. But if you want to have at least a minority government, you have to win that. So, that is a critical area that both Mr. Scheer and Mr. Trudeau are going to be spending a lot of time at. Quebec is a very different animal because, Jack Layton secured it for the NDP because of the cultural circumstances in Quebec, talking about cultures, immigrants, religious symbols, and really the impact of the NDP. We've seen Mr. Singh actually have a negative reaction within that culture. I have to say, I mean, it is all of those pieces which has helped the other parties to get more positioning. And so what we've seen there is an erosion of the NDP, but we've seen the pickup of the Bloc Québécois. And there's not a sense of separatism. If anything, the polling shows that today in this country, Quebec is in the top 3 of proud to be Canadian. In fact, if you ask them whether they wanted to have a celebration on July the 1st, they topped the country. But what you've seen is that the Bloc is more of a nationalist party. And in the absence of being able to vote for that NDP anomaly, as it was at the time, and how Mr. Singh is perceived there, it's now filtering over to the Bloc. So we have a 3-way race. And that is difficult for the Tories, because oftentimes that vote pulls away from them, and Mr. Trudeau is going to try and hold on to the Montreal area. So that's a critical area where even a tick one way or the other could cause some things. In Ontario, right now there's a battle for Ontario where Mr. Trudeau in the last month is actually doing better than Mr. Scheer for the very first time in a long time. But that 905 area is flipping back and forth. So much to your point, there's static parts of this country, and then there's going to be a couple of places which will be in play, which means that that's where the tour buses are going to be seen the most. That's where the most activity is going to be seen. And I think that's where we're going to be focused most of the time, trying to decide whether it's going to yield a minority or a majority.